Welcome to Armwood House and Flagler College. I'm Shelley Goose. I'm the director of the Lifelong Learning Program. And I'm so thrilled to see a lot of great, wonderful faces, familiar faces, new faces. So welcome to the great evening with a wonderful speaker, Megan Altus from the director of the St. Augustine Historical Society is going to introduce our speaker, Dr. Darien Andreu, who is Professor Emeritus of English at Flagler College. Thank you. Yeah, we're going to try that.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Before we get started here, I just want to let you know that we just received word, but for the St. Augustine Historical Society, our annual meeting will be held on January 20th, and we will be featuring Dr. Susan Parker talking to us about St. Augustine and the American Revolution. So stay tuned for the details on that. But tonight we have a very special presenter. Since 1987, Dr. Darien Andreu has been more than just an English professor at Flagler College. She's been a respected mentor, author, historian, and dedicated guardian of St. Augustine's Minorcan heritage. Raised in the rural area of Orange Park, Florida, she earned 3 degrees from Florida State University, including a PhD in American literature. Over her 38 years at Flagler College, she taught a wide range of courses from composition and creative writing to American literature. Throughout her tenure, Dr. Andreu has had a profound impact on her students and the St. Augustine community. The Student Government Association named her Teacher of the Year for her outstanding teaching and mentorship, and Phi Alpha Omega twice recognized her as Woman of the Year for her impactful contributions to the college community. In 2021, Dr. Andreu launched the Minorcan Studies Project to celebrate Minorcan heritage in St. Augustine. The project features a digital archive and cultural events to promote Minorcan tradition. Her dedication has earned her awards such as the Recognizing Outstanding Women in the Arts honor for her work preserving Minorcan culture in St. Augustine. I'd like to give a warm welcome to Dr. Darien Andreu.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Shelley, both of you, for attending to all the details that large and small that go into putting on an event like this. I also want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to present in this setting, the Markland House, because it has played an important role in Minorcan cultural history. So it's been nice to sit in this in Markland again. I once taught classes here a long time ago, my first years at Flagler, and so it's good to be back on campus, but I'm not ready yet to grade any papers. So every composition always gets caught in my throat. Flagler was a dream place to teach, and as Megan mentioned, in the last few years at Flagler, I was able to develop a Minorcan Studies project, and it involved this brochure, working with students. We put together this brochure for visitors to town. You all probably from here are familiar with, of course, a lot of these sites. And then we put together as well a website. So on the back of the brochure, you should be able to find the website. And what you'll, if you go there, there are a lot of what we hope are, there are a lot of resources that supplement the Minorcan story that you won't necessarily find elsewhere. Excuse me, that's what we've been working on among some other projects as well. But before I start, let me tell you, as I told my students in my lifelong learning class this semester, you've got to cut me a break, okay? Because I'm an English teacher who's going to be talking about history. And, you know, all the dates, aren't on the tip of my tongue. But I am a Minorcan descendant. So I hope that, grants me some street cred, you know? So the first point I want to make tonight, the main point I want to make tonight, is that the Minorcans have been in St. Augustine for nearly 250 years, and even a decade longer in Florida. Yet Minorcan cultural heritage in St. Augustine is nearly invisible to others. And frankly, it's somewhat, seemingly to me, little known by locals. I asked students in my class one semester, I said, who knows what a Minorcan is? And nobody raised their hand. Then finally one person tentatively raised his hand and said, well, they came across the Atlantic, the Mediterranean. I was like, awesome. Great start, $5 for you. And then I hired him to work on the Minorcan Studies project. So he's helped a lot with Roscoe Saunders has helped a lot with the things you'll see tonight. Let's see. So my question is, to go back to the 250 years that the Minorcans have been in St. Augustine, how is it that we know more about the 21 years of the British period in St. Augustine than we do the 250 years of the Minorcans in St. Augustine? There's so much of the story that has happened after those first 9 years in New Smyrna. And what I want to focus on in particular this evening is the importance of the Minorcan presence here. Dr. Andrew Anderson, who was the first prominent person in St. Augustine to take Minorcan culture seriously. And then, of course, I mean, it wouldn't be a Minorcan event without talking about the dattle pepper. So if you were cold in the room, just talking about dattle peppers will warm things up. But first, who are the Minorcans? All right. Yes, they came up with that. As Roscoe said, but the short version is they're 18th century indentured laborers who immigrated from Italy, Greece, and Minorca. And because the Minorcans were the largest contingent among the nationalities, the whole group eventually became known as Minorcans. They were brought over by Dr. Andrew Turnbull to work on an indigo plantation in return for the promise of 50 acres of Florida land. The story of those first 9 years in New Smyrna is really fascinating. I mean, sort of kind of horribly fascinating. Everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. And for example, there had been preparations made for the Minorcan settlers in New Smyrna where they were going to live and, you know, perpetually, but that didn't work out. Preparations for 500. But Dr. Andrew Turnbull had the opportunity to bring 1250. So, you know, food, housing, clothing, you know, resources were just it was hardship from you know the beginning. And but nevertheless, the folks cleared the land, built houses, worked in the fields, dug canals, all under the whip of plantation overseers. And the processing of indigo was particularly nasty work. Indigo, why indigo? Indigo, the plant, the blue dye, was once at that time, 1768, as valuable as gold, ounce for ounce, as valuable as gold. It was that desired of, you know, this esteemed coloring. But the planting, the processing of indigo was really nasty work. It had to be fermented through a series of vats. The stench was awful. It attracted droves of flies. People turned blue. So, the first 9 years of the Minorcans' time in Florida is its own chapter. Its own book. And again, today I'd like to focus on Minorcans here in St. Augustine. So, because there are about 25,000 Minorcans who still live in St. Johns County, right? They're one of the oldest, most significant, and least known ethnic groups in Florida. Their closest historic parallels are the Cajuns of Louisiana. Both groups came from far away. They spoke another language, and they brought with them their culture and cuisine. They stayed on when the British left Florida. They stayed on in 1784 when the Spanish left Florida. The date, 1821, thank you, and became the area's old timers, right? While the Minorcan story is a remarkable American immigrant story, I do want to say up front that I'm not arguing for something like Minorcan exceptionalism. That'd be going way too far. But like many immigrant stories, it's a story that has a tale of remarkable, admirable resilience. And I also want to argue that the importance of the Minorcan community to St. Augustine in Florida, reason one is because they've been a sustaining population, as well as making a lot of wonderful contributions here and elsewhere that we'll get into in just a moment. So the Minorcans are the largest single group of Europeans to come at one time to North America during the colonial era. That includes Jamestown, Plymouth Colony. So, 1,400 people, that was the original number that set sail for Florida. Only 1,250 survived the voyage over. And in 1768, Andrew Turnbull, let's see, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. Brought them over for the indigo, again, more valuable than gold, and was going to make a profit. Also growing, sugar, rice, tried silk. He'd recruited about 5 Frenchmen, and they were going to go with the vines and wines. For a little bit, that didn't work. Neither did the silk. Neither the indigo began to pay some returns in the middle 3 years that the Minorcans were on the plantation. But for the most part, all the investors lost everything they had put into it. Turnbull had recruited the Minorcans by way of indentured contracts. And the contracts were anywhere from 3 to 10 years. And after 9 years, when the Minorcans had fulfilled, most of the contracts had been fulfilled, they were getting a sense that they weren't going to be let out of these contracts anytime soon. Turnbull said, no, you got to read the small print. Your contract starts as soon as the plantation begins to make a profit. They were also worried, the Italians and the Minorcans, that they weren't going to be able to receive property, the 50 acres, because of being Catholic in British Florida at that time. With these kinds of concerns, they reached out to the governor of St. Augustine to seek sanctuary. And the short version of that is they were able to come to St. Augustine and settle here. but they had to do so by way of making a 70-mile walk from New Smyrna to St. Augustine. That took about 4 days, 3 nights. And then when they got here to St. Augustine, they had to start over again. They had to start over once again. They were living, there was not much housing for them. Of the original, there ended up being about 600 Minorcans who came to St. Augustine from New Smyrna. Of that group, only 400 were of that original group who came across the Atlantic. There had been that, they had buried 964 people in New Smyrna over 9 years. So things were tough. Let's see. As I mentioned today, there's still a number of descendants in St. Johns County, and there are also Minorcans who went back to New Smyrna, so Minorcan descendants there. There are Minorcan descendants up in Mayport. That's where my father's side of the family settled. And there are Minorcans in Mandarin, in Elkton, Hastings, in Palatka, as well as a few in Tampa and Key West. So I want to identify just a few of their contributions before we return to Minorcans in St. Augustine. So not many people know that Minorcans, the Minorcans of Minorca, that small island off the coast of Spain, it's about an 8-hour ferry ride. The Minorcans of Minorca invented mayonnaise. And so this was in 1756, before the Minorcans came here. And it was when Minorca was one of these, islands in the Mediterranean that was sat out, in the waters. And so was and it had a wonderful deep water port. And so everybody tried to conquer it from time to time. And so when the French were there, in Minorca, they became really smitten with this white sauce that was available, the local white sauce, and so they appropriated it and but named it after the capital of Minorca, Mahon, or Mahonnaise, so that we have today. So, but again, that too has been lost in the fog of times. Minorcans, another one of their contributions is, you may think so or not, but they returned Catholicism to Florida and St. Augustine. Their spiritual leader, Father Camps, who is on the front of this brochure, saw them through a lot of hard days down in New Smyrna, and then the first 13 years here in St. Augustine that he was still alive. He had hoped when he came up with the group from New Smyrna to go back to Minorca and live out his days there, but no Catalan-speaking priests were ever sent to St. Augustine. The Minorcans did not speak Spanish; they spoke Catalan, and so that never happened. So he stayed on, and initially he was buried in the Tolomano Cemetery, and now his body's been moved, and he's buried into the center of the Catholic Church. Minorcans peopling St. Augustine. Minorcans have been, from time to time, the majority population in the area. In the 1786 census, taken by Father Thomas Hassett, there were 1,693 people in the St. Augustine area, and 650. That's not a majority. Anyway, they were a majority population, and of the white inhabitants, 72% of them were Minorcan. Historian Helen Tanner argues that during that era, the Spanish East Florida could be characterized basically as a Minorcan capital. So historians Michael Gannon and Patricia Griffin have pointed out that the Minorcans were the majority population in St. Augustine from 1786 up to the beginning of the Civil War. So, the Minorcans, also, one of their quiet contributions to, St. Augustine is that when they came here, they provided an important, working class. They were the town's farmers, mariners, carpenters, fish, and fishermen, and so on. So, finally, another slide. When the Civil War broke out, Minorcans played an important role. In St. Augustine, Minorcan, as you might imagine, the Minorcan sympathy was Confederate. However, the two highest ranking military members of in highest ranking Minorcans that served were in the Union Army. And the first was Admiral David Farragut of Minorcan descent. Now, he wasn't of this Minorcan colony, the New Smyrna group. His relatives came later. But yes, there you go over to Minorca, there is this marvelous statue of him in the old capital, Cuitadella, and on the east end of the island. General Stephen Vincent Benet was a Minorcan who grew up here in St. Augustine. And he was Lincoln's key advisor for cannon development. And his great General Stephen Vincent Benet, when he returned to visit family here in St. Augustine after the war, nobody wanted to talk to him. And his mother was very upset. That's General Stephen Vincent Benet had great grandchildren who became important literary figures in the first half of the 20th century. And therein is where my background in English connects with the Minorcan story, I guess most actively. The youngest of the literary Benets, Stephen, Laura, and William, but Stephen wrote the widely read at that time John Brown's Body, a Civil War epic poem, and he's also known today best for his short story The Devil and Daniel Webster. So that's at least something in our vocabulary, I think. Among the Benets, they won 3 Pulitzer Prizes in the first half of the 20th century. And again, they were really good people. They weren't the flamboyant writers like the Hemingway and the Fitzgerald. And they sort of wrote in an older style, or Victorian style, rather than the modernist style. And so their writing has kind of fallen out of favor. And you don't find them in the literary anthology so much today. But during their time, they were the literary gatekeepers of the American literary world. Let's see, other Minorcan contributions. We've had Minorcans who have gone off to Hollywood, and Judy Canova. She was kind of the Carol Burnett of her day. She was a comedian. She was a singer. She won. She has 2 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. One in radio, and the other in television. So yeah, gotta claim everything. And then Minorcans have also had a literary bestseller. Maybe you've seen it around. It's called. It was by Ernie Meitler. It's called White Trash Cooking. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for quite a while, for weeks and weeks and weeks. Let's see. Yeah, he's got a great story. But we'll move on. I mean, just the title of that book should, I mean, it always stops me because it tells me something about how Minorcans kind of looked at themselves. You know? Minorcans from St. Augustine have been declared, two Minorcans have been declared among our great Floridians. XL Pellissier, this medallion is on the Longius House. And Albert Manussi, who was a National Park Service historian at the Castillo. Two Minorcans have been recognized as, have received Florida Folklife Heritage Awards, Stuart Passetti, and this is Mike Husina. They've done so much work to carry forward the net making traditions of the Minorcans. You can still buy wonderful cast nets from Mike Husina, go online. But maybe the Minorcan contribution that's most with us these days is the Dowel pepper, right? The hot spicy Dowel pepper with that deceptive fruity flavor. So back to that in just a few minutes. So once again, why has there been the omission of the Minorcan story from St. Augustine's story? A lot of reasons, but in part, it's the typical immigrant story of, going to a new place, being eager to move forward and to assimilate, right? And the Minorcans were often reminded here in town ever since that they had been Turnbull slaves. Okay. But don't use that polite word. Insert the N word. They were known as that, and disparaged as such. So they kept to themselves, they married among themselves, everybody's a cousin, you look at the family trees, the genealogies, and everybody has these Minorcan names in their as you look back. So yeah, they've been called clannish. That's part of the legacy. During the 40 years of the Second Spanish period, Minorcans were content when they were known as Spanish. They were dark complected, and they seemed to speak a language that might have been Spanish. But for all that, the stigma of their second class status persisted. Today, there are no fluent speakers in town who still speak the Catalan or the Minorcan Creolized version of it. The Catholic Minorcans have married into Minorcan families. In the past, you could recognize a Minorcan because they were, typically short, dark eyes, and dark hair. If they didn't, continue, they have to continue to dye it like I did when they couldn't get older. But I can tell you that my nephew is 6'3", and my four nieces are all very fair skinned, fair headed. It's the Minorcan surnames that have survived. So on the back of your brochure, you can see the 48 Minorcan names that were still in St. Augustine when this Father Camp statue was installed next to the Catholic Cathedral. Okay, so but there have been over 200 family names once upon a time, down in Minorca. But in 1975, when the statue was installed, there were these 48 names, and some of these are gone now from St. Augustine. I think Longius is no longer here. Sabate is no longer here. So what are we going to do? But as you look at these names, do you see familiar
Yes.
streets? Such as Jimenez? Yeah, Jimenez Spatio House. Masters Drive, right? Yeah,
City.
Passetti,
Joe.
Passetti Park.
Joe Palmer Park.
Joe Pomar Park, yeah, great. What's it, Pellisier, yes, Pellisier Creek,
Lots of Pellisiers.
lots of
around
Pellisier
town.
Creek, around, good, yes. Leonardi Nursery, right, yeah. You know the name of the Volano Bridge?
Yeah.
The Mary Francis and Mary Eusina Bridge,
Yeah.
yeah. There's Canova Street, which is right over there. Gennevar Road up near Lowe's. And on St. George Street, there's a Benet store, the Benet store and house, right? So ice cream. And then, too, what, I think could be a part of this list, and in a way, are the Minorcan, the names that are Minorcan by marriage now, the Micklers, right? Not the Micklers. If you're local, you know the Mickler.
Could you explain right now, little foreigner, why that's my word and not Mickler?
Because they said so. And how about Coley? It looks like Coley, right? Cooley. And yet there's I just learned this, last week, there's a group of the Coolies who like to be known as Coley. So I guess it's, works either way. Their names like Stratton and Weedman, that are also Minorcan by marriage names in town. And then there are names of, that are Minorcan in town that we don't recognize anymore as Minorcan. For example, my last name, Andrew, is, often spelled with a W, right? It's easier, certainly, would make my life a lot easier. But, the St. Andrew's Court over there off, Canova Street, is an old Minorcan, neighborhood. Benet has become Bennett. Maestra has become Masters. We don't have Maestra, but, we do have Masters. So things like that. But yeah, so the Minorcanness is still with us in St. Augustine, but again, it's hidden, by layers of time and memory. But one well-to-do city leader here in St. Augustine saw the importance of Minorcan heritage and did a fair amount, made some beautiful efforts to save it. And that's this gentleman right here. I know that not everyone can see this painting, but maybe up here. That's Dr. Andrew Anderson II. And of course, we're in his home. So he if not for Dr. Anderson, the Fromaggiati's Easter serenade would have been probably lost to us. In the early years of St. Augustine, the early years when the Minorcans were in St. Augustine, one of their more public traditions was during the Easter season to, bands of young men would go through downtown caroling the night before Easter, and they would sing at, the doors and windows of certain houses that where maybe certain young women live, in hopes that if they sang well enough, they would be given the Easter treat, an Easter cheese treat called a Fromaggiati's and Fromaggiati's. And so this tradition went on for a while, and Anderson knew of it. It's Dr. Graham, longtime member of the Historical Society, right, who tells the story of the rescue of the Fromaggiati's tradition ever so well in his book, The Awakening of St. Augustine. This was one of the first histories I read when I came to St. Augustine in 1987. Dr. Graham at that time was the history department at Flagler College. And today he's retired, professor emeritus. He's written, the definitive biography, as you probably know well, on Henry Flagler. He's still running. He's still winning his age group. I mean, he's amazing. But yeah, he has given us this Anderson story of saving the Fromaggiatis. The Andersons were a well-to-do family who came to St. Augustine in 1829. Anderson came from New York City for his wife's health. They bought land here, right here, between where we stand and the San Sebastian River. He put orange groves on it, built this home, and he named it after his brother-in-law, Mark. So that's why this is Markland. But there were two Dr. Andersons. This is what's father and son, right? Anderson II was born in 1839, and that's who we're looking at here. The year his father died. So he grew up in St. Augustine, attended Princeton, earned his medical degree in New York City, and returned to practice in St. Augustine, and became active as a philanthropist and in community service. He served as mayor of St. Augustine. He was leader in the Presbyterian Church. He sold part of his orange grove to his good friend Henry Flagler, so that Flagler could build the first of his grand hotels here in St. Augustine, the Hotel Pasta Leon. He had a penchant. He loved commissioned public art here in town, as he had seen, in the cities he had traveled in Europe. And so Dr. Anderson gave us, he gave us the Ponce de Leon statue that stands at the intersection near the Bridge of Lions. Life size. I mean, I think Ponce de Leon was only 4'8". And the Bridge of Lions. As a special treat, when you leave here tonight, go out into the hallway, and at the entrance to the parlor, you will see quarter-sized lions, replicas of the Bridge of Lions lions that are here in his home. I have a slide later, I should have put it in next, but of Anderson standing with one of those little lion statues right out on the front steps of Markland here. It's really pretty wonderful. And yes, Dr. Anderson also gave us this World War I flagstaff. Okay. And that was dedicated on Armistice Day, 1921. And Anderson was the speaker. And at the end of his remarks, he gave the city and the Minorcans a really special gift. Anderson talked about some of his travels to Europe that he had done in 1888. And when he was in Spain, he decided to make a side trip to Minorca. Now, that would have been some trouble, 1888, area for Minorca. And when he arrived, he encountered lots of reminders of St. Augustine and Minorca. He saw those, he heard those familiar Minorcan family names. He thought, the houses were incredibly, clean and very modest. The clean part, I don't think I inherited. In fact, Anderson sent a wonderful letter to Henry Flagler recording his observations. You can read it. It's one of the treasures of the Historical Society today. Let me try to channel Dr. Anderson as he describes one of the nights of this trip back, or his time in Minorca. So at the ceremony, he said, if you will pardon a personal narrative, I may say that in 1888, I was in the island of Minorca and wishing to go from Port Mahon to Tuitadella at the opposite end of the island. I chartered the only available vehicle, which was a curious affair resembling a truncated omnibus. This omnibus was drawn by a very tall horse and a very short mule, which were driven by a handsome young Minorcan. Owing to the lack of coordination between the paces of the tall horse and the short mule, for when the horse walked fast, the mule had to gallop. And when the mule walked slowly, the horse had to stop. Our progress was very slow, and night overtook us long before we reached our destination. Fortunately, a brilliant full moon arose, and possibly made a little sentimental by its rays. I bethought of the Fromaggiatis, that signature Easter Minorcan song he had heard, as a kid here in St. Augustine. And he said, I sang of it what I knew. The handsome Minorcan was astonished and said, I never did expect to hear a foreign gentleman sing that song. And I said to him, over 100 years ago, some of your people crossed the seas to the new country and there made themselves homes. And for many years, every Easter Eve, they have sung the Fromaggiatis. And now I have brought it back across the sea and am singing it among its own native hills. That's a good writer. And that's amazing serendipity, I just, but years later, in 1921, back in St. Augustine, Anderson had watched the Fromaggiatis tradition fade away, and he was worried that, the song was going to be lost. And so what he did was he went out and found two Minorcans who still remembered the song, the music and the lyrics, and they scored it. And Dr. Anderson had it put in this pamphlet and given out at that Armistice Day event to everyone in town. And he had the band play it for everyone. And so the song you heard on repeat at the beginning was some of that Minorcan folk song. This copy, I got to fold it. It's also in the St. Augustine Historical Library Archive. And at the top, it says, was given to Mr. Charles Segee, Minorcan last name, right? Compliments of Dr. Anderson. So, yes, it's so special. Let's see, last spring, take a little detour to the present. The Lifelong Learning Program and Shelley Hazer sponsored a reenactment of the Minorcan Fromaggiatis tradition here in St. Augustine. And we had Michelle Reyna, our Minorcan songbird, led everyone into the old Minorcan Quarter right there on Spanish Street. I really think it should be called Minorcan Street. And we went to the doors of some of the homes in that area, the Pellissier home and the Meitler home, and Michelle sang this beautiful Fromaggiatis serenade. And the tradition, of course, right, was to go to homes, sing well enough to get a Fromaggiatis treat. But if someone didn't think you didn't sing well enough, the band of singers would, sing a rude verse to you and move along. So I think I have this queued up where I can play a clip. And in the room is the man, Scott York. Scott, are you here? Wave your hand. Yes, he played the role of the rude gentleman. So, can we turn it up? It's like on this side, maybe. Oh, but. I'm just gonna tip something. Okay, that's all right. Yeah. Good. I think it'll play through. Thank you so much. Well, you can see Michelle is, trying to convince Scott to, um, uh, to give her some ingredients for making, Minorcans. And Scott empties his pockets, saying he has nothing.
You want to try to turn it off?
It's almost over.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but it was a lot of fun. There was a big group. We were moving through, the community. It would be so great to do something like this before Easter again here in town, and you should come with us, Michelle said. Scott says, you should go to rich people across the street. So, it was a great time. And I think it could be a really good time that, after the Fromaggiati's, treats were collected, the young men went to the bayfront, drank wine, and, till the sun came up on Easter, right? Dr. Andrew Anderson saved this tradition for us, for St. Augustine, for the Minorcans. And I have one more, Andrew Anderson, or one more Anderson family Minorcan story. And that happened much more recently. In the 1980s, Dr. Andrew Anderson's daughter, Clarissa Anderson Gibbs, who also lived in this home, when she was in her 90s, she came back to town. And she took up her father's charitable work, as well as his interest in Minorcans. She recruited Minorcan Kenny Beeson, a Pomar descendant, who was at that time he was a future mayor of St. Augustine, and they co-founded the Minorcan Cultural Society. Over the years, the Minorcan Cultural Society has put on many wonderful events, and it still has the annual festival in the Lambias House Garden each spring. And I call that festival the Saltwater Minorcan Festival, because that's the one that's, here on the coast. There are also wonderful festivals, Minorcan festivals out at St. Ambrose Catholic Church in Elkton. And, that's the freshwater Minorcan festival. But yeah, I recommend stopping by. There's food and music and, good times. But today, what's most visible to us about the Minorcan culture? The Dattle Pepper, right? And the Dattle Pepper defines Minorcan culture the way Tabasco sauce and the cayenne pepper define Cajun culture. Where did it come from? The Dattle Pepper, for many, many years, there had been circulated this romantic legend that the origins of the Dattle Pepper seeds were brought over by Minorcan women. The seeds were sewn into the seeds of their skirts for safekeeping when they came across the Atlantic. It's a great story. But in the late 20th century, when a group of St. Augustinians, and among them Minorcan descendant St. Augustine mayor at that time, Kitty Beeson, traveled over to Minorca, they asked all the citizens, like, tell us about your Dattle Pepper. And they were like, we've never heard of it. Yeah, one clue to the origin of the Dattle Pepper is, you can find in the St. Augustine Record, a 1937 article that reported that Dattle Pepper seeds were probably imported from Cuba in the 1880s. And this was a reminiscence of R.A. Ponce. And he recalled that there was a St. Augustine merchant in town, S.B. Balls, who had sent to Santiago, Cuba, where he was from, for the seeds of a Spanish Dattle Pepper plant. And when they came, Mr. Ponce planted them in his home garden on the southwest corner of Charlotte and Kuna Street. They probably were shared from that point on. More recently, the research of University of Florida horticulturalists state that the Dado pepper may have originated in Peru, and then brought to Cuba, Jamaica by the trade routes. So yeah, and whoops, we're a little ahead of ourselves. Another early mention of the Dado pepper is in the St. Augustine Record, the 1931 article that reports that St. Augustine entrepreneur Charlie Hopkins was going to open a Dado pepper factory here in town. He manufactured all kinds of marmalades and jellies and and was going to manufacture Dado pepper sauce and Dado pepper dressing. However, by 1937, 2 years later, his business was no longer in the city director. And this was during the Depression era, and maybe people didn't have time or have the money for a luxury of that sort. But at the same time, I mean, we all know if you've ever had Dado pepper, a little dab will do you, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so it's just like my jar of Dado pepper lasts a whole year in my pantry. Today, again, back to the Cajun comparison. If you go to Cajun country in Louisiana, near Lafayette, Louisiana, about an hour, 45 minutes, an hour south, there is one of the most popular stops is in Avery Island, where the McElhinney Tabasco sauce factory is. And you can take a tour. I mean, they're hard to get to come by. People visit, and this is out in the middle of nowhere. and you can, as you move through the tour, you can see the conveyor belts, processing the Dado pepper, the cayenne pepper, and bottling, all the bottling that's going on. And at the end of the tour, you of course walk through an obligatory gift shop. And there's Tabasco everything there. There's t-shirts, there's Tabasco chocolate, there's amazing Tabasco ice cream. And it's really wonderful. I was really worried about getting blown out by the Tabasco, but that the milk in anything with a hot spice, the milk takes the edge off that sting. So it was really great. Another Dado pepper legend is that the pepper can only be grown in St. Augustine. I sort of wish it were true, because then it would be really distinctive. But my relatives have grown the Dado pepper on the bluffs of Fairhope, Alabama. Roscoe Saunders, a former student, wrote to me just last week and said that he has friends growing. He encouraged friends out in Arizona to grow Dado peppers, and the bushes look really robust. So maybe it's going to catch on in other places too. I just wonder, maybe somebody should take Dado pepper seeds back to Minorca. So to wrap up, for almost 250 years, one of the most distinct treasures, of course, my opinion, of St. Augustine's cultural heritage has lived under the radar. With the 250th celebration of Minorcans here in St. Augustine coming up just 2 years from now, 2027, what can we do? What can we do? And there are people who are putting plans in place here in St. Augustine and in New Smyrna. So that there will be events, there'll be an outreach. It's on my wish list is that would be a standing Minorcan exhibit in the visitor center. When people come through, would love if we could create a Minorcan heritage that would start in New Smyrna and mark the places where the old Kings Road. There's a wonderful Facebook group making efforts to already do that. in Flagler County. But mark the Minorcan Trail all the way up, here through St. Augustine. I think we should mark the Minorcan Trail all the way up to Mayport. So, where Minorcans ended up. Let's see. But yeah, that 70-mile walk, or at least, have it online, have it marked digital, but available. There's a Minorcan pocket park on Spanish Street. I think it'd be really great if you put a mural there behind it. The wall is just a blank wall. And I think we should plant some Dowell pepper and indigo, in the pocket park. And of course, I think we should reestablish the Fromaggiani serenading, it was so much fun. Is there somebody out there that, would be willing to sponsor a Minorcan food truck? We don't have a Minorcan restaurant here in town. I mean, if you want Minorcan food, right? If you want great Minorcan clam chowder, go out to Elkton before the festival starts at noon in March 15th next year. Get there early because Mary Ann Masters has Minorcan clam chowder that the New York Times just came down to profile. It's incredible. It sells out every year. So, the festival only runs 12 to 4 and it sells out by 2. I buy, the mild. There's mild, medium, and spicy. Or no, mild, medium, spicy, yeah. And great Minorcan clam chowder. You can also find Minorcan clam chowder, of course, at Schooners and at Osteen's. And they both serve on certain days of the week or the month the Minorcan rice dish, perlo. Which the third right. Don't go there. I won't perlo. Yeah, don't go there on the third Friday. Is that Osteen's or Schooner? Osteen's, third Friday of every month. And they vary the protein that goes in it, right? It's sometimes sausage. It's always shrimp. Always shrimp. Okay, I thought I had sausage. Okay, there might have been. Not on Friday. Not on Friday. Oh, okay. All right. Put a meat on a Friday. Of course. Excuse me. I need to go to your session. All right. There's also, if you want to get your smoked mullet, you have to go to Cal Seafood, right? Past the city gates. Hippo Popsicle has dattle fruit flavored popsicles. They're really wonderful. And Bog Brewery over on West King Street now carries 2 kind of dattle pepper beers. And I'm not a beer drinker at all, but I had to try them and I thought they were terrific. I mean, it's a good thing they aren't closer. Because they were wonderful. I'm really impressed. One thing that's already been done is Bob Jones, who lives in Tallahassee. He grew up here in St. Augustine and he married his wife Melinda, who he calls his Minorcan queen. She was a Usina. Bob was 93 years old yesterday. And he drives to St. Augustine frequently. He'll be in town tomorrow. Yeah. But what he did recently is so beautiful. He placed this Minorcan marker in Tolomato Cemetery that commemorates many Minorcan descendants are buried in the Tolomato Cemetery at the top of Canova Street. Right? Canova Street. What am I saying? So yeah, it says in memory of the survivors of the New Smyrna Minorcan colony buried in the cemetery. Many of the headstones, there are only about 30 headstones that have Minorcan names, but many more Minorcans are buried there. And by extension, this is to commemorate to the 964 Minorcan dead in New Smyrna. Yeah. So I think there's a screenplay that needs to be written and about the Minorcan story. I'm not kidding. And there's a Ken Burns movie to be made. He's coming out with his American Revolution. I hope there's a mention Minorcans somewhere in there. But we will see. So I'll stop here and say thank you for making your special efforts to be here tonight. Really enjoyed sharing this information with you. Appreciate it. Yeah, you have a question? Yeah, go ahead.
What was the motivation of Turnbull
Turnbull, yes.
to bring these workers from the Mediterranean
Ah, great
and
question.
not from Africa?
Okay, so
And
why
where
did
is he from? Where's Turnbull?
where Turnbull from? Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, he's a Scottish physician. He was well connected in London, and so he was able to recruit some investors for 100,000 acres in the New Smyrna area. And why did he bring people from the Mediterranean? His wife had grown up in Greece, and he met her there. She was actually French, but she grew up in Greece, and and he knew that Greeks could handle the hot weather. So it was like, I'm gonna get 500 people from Greece and bring them over. So he tried. He could only get 200 people to leave. You know, there was a war going on there, and nobody wanted to let go of able-bodied men. He also recruited in Italy. He could only get 100 people from Italy. He took those men from Italy. He had left them in Minorca while he was going around the Mediterranean trying to recruit other folks. And those 110 men from Italy married Minorcan women. So when Turnbull got back to Minorca he now needed 8 ships instead of the original 5 he wanted, or 6. And all the Minorcans that had married in the Italians, wanted their family members to come along. And so he thought, gosh, I thought 500 would be great, but 1,400 will work too. And so all these hot weather people, we're gonna know how to do it here in Florida. So that's why they came, that's why he went for the Mediterranean coast.
Of Africa.
Right, okay. The other thing is,
Yeah.
to buy slaves would have been quite expensive. Would have been quite expensive. But as Dr. Dan Schaefer argues, retired history professor at the University of North Florida, he argues Turnbull and his partners would have been better off buying slaves because there would have been no, into the contract. They wouldn't have been looking for a release from the contract. So that's how that worked out.
Well, let's just hope he was against slavery. But here's my question, right into this, which you almost answered. Is that you mentioned that we're all called Minorcans just because we're the largest group. But if DNA was done, what would it look like? But you already said it got mushed together before they even came. So people that might be Minorcan, quote unquote Minorcan, and did their DNA, what does it look like in their DNA? Because there is no, they'd either be in Minorca, Italy, Greek, or a mixture.
So, yeah, I'm trying to think if I have any Greek or Italian in my family line. I sort of don't think I do.
So what does you have a DNA?
Yeah, I did the
And what did
23andMe.
it show?
But so it showed,
Is Minorca counted as Spanish?
it showed, Iberian descent.
Yeah,
It didn't differentiate any further than that.
it's getting more and more. I just saw another now that
Mhm.
I should look at mine. They're even doing more narrow and narrow all the time.
But I have, Minorcan friends who, know that they have Greek and Italian background. I mean, you can almost tell from the names, right? Of the 48 names here on the back of your brochure, there are only 2 Greek names that were still with us. Genopoli and Pat. Okay, but your Italian names would of course be, Passetti, and Leonardi, right? Yeah. Manussi, right? Yeah. Okay. Question way in the back.
Maybe 400 Africans were coming over about plantation some. Ship was lost.
A ship of 400 slaves was coming over from Africa that was lost. I'd like to track that down because the information is uncertain. And in the Turnbull letters, there's no mention of that loss. And I think, you know, the letters, you can find excerpts of them online. Dr. Schaefer has put up this wonderful Florida History Online website that presents those letters. Turnbull doesn't mention that lost slave ship. And I just think he would have whined about it, you know? Yeah, and so, yeah, I'd love to know more. Yeah, a great question though. And if anybody does, please. Question way in the back of the wall. So come forward a little bit more, at least to the middle of the room, yeah, if you don't mind. Okay.
Alexander, this is fantastic. I just moved to St. Augustine. I'm from Minorcan, Lebanese ambassador from Spain. And please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'd like to ask you mentioned that one of the reasons that, let's say, the American heritage is not that recognized today is because, among other reasons, as many immigrants, they wanted to move on and assimilate. And as an immigrant, I ask myself, if instead of that, it's because it's a history of shame forced by others, but forced them to hide, to be accepted.
I hope I brought that out too, you know, by, you know, my dad was very dark skinned. I remember as a kid, you know, going to the city pool and somebody asked me, is he black, you know? And I thought, great, you know? But I mean, that was held against, you know, the Minorcans, the Italians, you know, for, I mean, I'm trying to write about that now, you know, but yeah, that immigrant status, that dark complexion was, you know, it was better to be the noble Spanish, right, to associate, you know, with Spanish, and that's why, yeah, I think that the stigma of shame was as stayed, even to this day, people still have stories. Thank you. Let's see, yeah.
You didn't mention this, but are there any remnants of Turnbull's plantation today in Smyrna?
Yes, there has been an archaeological study dig done down there. And I haven't seen those. I think it was on private property, so it had to be covered back up. But if you look online, there's the New Smyrna Museum of History has a discussion of that archaeological dig, and it's wonderful. And it has, for example, on that site a map that shows the houses of the Minorcan settlers, right? And these houses are located along an 8-mile strip of land on the waterfront, the Halifax River. So that everybody in a house would have, you know, an oyster bed in front of them and some property behind to, you know, have a garden. And where was I going with this? Oh, but the thing was, you know, with the Minorcans living in these houses so spread out over 8 miles, it was hard to have community. You know, like, you know, if every house is sort of a 200 yards away from the next house, you know, so that the collaboration that could have happened down there did not happen. And as soon as the Minorcans got back to St. Augustine, they moved back into in clusters again, in families. That area, the old Minorcan quarter on Spanish Street, is called Little San Felipe, after the Minorcan community in Mahon, where that group of Minorcans came from. So, but in that archaeological study, there weren't many artifacts found. They found, you know, some posts and, you know, some the lodging, and they could tell that people were living in duplexes, like the Peso de Burgo Pellicier house, right up on St. George Street. Yeah. And, but go take a look at that. I, you know, I wish we could use radar to find, those 964 people buried in New Smyrna are missing. I wish we could use, you know, the tools we have today to find out more about that Minorcan community, you know, colony, or, yeah, in New Smyrna. So, a question way in the back.
Is there any old journals, observations that you ever read about that when they came here, that they all adapt Catalan's language, they all speak, or did they make the language, they all stopped English? I've never seen like how long languages last a year.
Okay, so, there's a book called, Minorcans of Florida by, Philip Roscoe. He teaches up at Vanderbilt University still. He's a linguist, and, he teaches, linguistics, Catalan, Spanish, there. And, he came to St. Augustine in 1990s, because he heard about this Minorcan Catalan speaking community. He was like, oh my gosh, you know, I've got to find out about this. And so, really nice book. But when he came to, St. Augustine in the 90s, he visited with, Mayor Kenny Beeson and XL Pellissier. And, there was nobody speaking, you know, there was one fluent speaker left. And even earlier, I know you're talking about earlier, Father Camp stayed so that there could be Catalan spoken in the church, for another 13 years. And then the Spanish came back to St. Augustine. Spanish are Catholic, Minorcans are Catholic, you know, eventually, you know, they're sharing the same church. You know, eventually second generations, third generations are coming along. And so the Catalan that, Dr. Rasco found here in St. Augustine is just this creolized version of Spanish and Minorcan. And so, you know, just over the years, it's faded out. I mean, lucky for the Cajuns, they were able to catch the loss of French in their community in time to put it back in the schools, 40 years ago. The Irish, right, were able to catch the loss of the Gaelic, that was happening. But the Minorcans were under the radar. It wasn't until Dr. Anderson, as Tom Graham argues, Dr. Anderson was the first prominent person in town who took Minorcans seriously. You know, it's like, gosh, thank you. Thank you. This is amazing. So thank you all. Really good. Thanks. Yeah. Because they're up on the electric. Governor Thomas. One of the reasons we have to St. Augustine office, so we able-bodied men join because those upstart American in Georgia and the exactly. And so I got kind of feeling like the drama was turned on. Yeah, on top of it. So that's something that I'm going to get on now. I just want to join. Yeah. Also, I think it's called something we were talking about in the exhibit. So I wanted to talk to you and that about like what we is really good with art. Okay. So why? I mean, that would be next year. I want to sort that out. I wonder now that we were planning that. The art. And talk about what it should be like. For that. So wonderful. Thank you. Oh, I think like as I'm using research to be my that way the service came up and we're like, you know, release us, and then like the order trigger the house was like, no, and it was like that. You know what? I hate turtle, so yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yes,
That's exactly what it was. So I thought that was, I just love